Okay, so today I'm going to take you through the notes for bullet point 3 on the provisional government. What they need to know for the exam is that you need to understand the nature of the dual authority. What is it? What makes it up? So basically, you've got two entities in Russia after the fall of Nicholas. You've got the provisional government, which is made up of people from the Duma, the rebellious Duma, and they're the only people who know how to run the country, so that's why they're there. The other body is the Soviet, which is representatives of the people, so representatives of the workers, soldiers, sailors, peasants, everyone. They're like a supervisory body, making sure that the provisional government sort of make the right decisions based on what the workers and soldiers and peasants want. So that's why they're there. So they work as a sort of dual partnership, and that's all you really need to know. As depicted by my picture, the Soviet wears the pants in this relationship. Really it's because of Order Number 1, which means that the Soviet has control of the Petrograd garrison. If the provisional government do need any soldiers for any reason, they would have to ask the permission of the Soviet. So because the Soviet are representatives of the workers and peasants and things, they have quite a massive amount of control in the city. For example, they control the railway stations and all the communications in the city. So transport in and out and supplies and things, they can go on strike at any time and the Soviet will back them. So they've got more power, and that's why they wear the trousers in the relationship. The provisional government is weaker because it's unelected, and it's just a stopgap really until the Constituent Assembly elections happen, which happen in November. So what you also need to know is what are the problems that provisional government face at this point. Firstly, because we've got rid of Nicholas, the peasants are just taking the land by force. Obviously this has been a massive bone of contention for many years, and they just think, well, no one can stop us now because the Tsar's gone, so we'll just take it by force. So there's chaos in the countryside, attacks on landowners. The problem the provisional government have is if they redistribute the land, the peasants in the army would just desert and go back to, place a claim really on the land. So, the fact that they need them still fighting in the war means that they can't redistribute the land. So really, the first thing is that they need them to stay fighting, and the second thing is they don't really have the authority to redistribute the land because they're waiting for the Constituent Assembly. The other thing is obviously World War One. The war's causing a massive economic problems at this point, from inflation, amongst other things. But basically Russia is staying afloat from the funds that they get from France and Britain. But if they pulled out of the war, yes, they would have more time to sort out their economy and domestic issues because they wouldn't have to worry about war. But they would lose all those funds from France and Britain, which are helping them stay afloat. So they kind of have to stay in the war at this point. Also, the war is causing economic problems, of course. All the priority goes to the army. There's no consumer goods being made. There's no food around. Major trading is on the black market. So life is pretty hard for Russians at this point. And so, they'd like an end to war. They want someone to sort it out. Hence why the Bolsheviks are so popular. And finally, the minorities as well, they want independence. Now that the Tsar's gone, they don't really want to be part of Russia, and they just want independence for themselves. They hated Russification and all the anti-Semitism, so, that's what they want. But, in particular the Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of Russia, if that left Russia, you wouldn't have anyone feeding the people, so it's a very difficult decision to make. Okay, so you also need to know what is the importance and significance of Lenin's return and his influence after that. So in April 1917, Lenin returns from exile. He's written his April thesis on the training, and the April thesis is a plan for his party. It's to direct his party. The main points are that there should be no cooperation with the provisional government, because ideally they want to overthrow it. No cooperation with other parties either, and worldwide socialist revolution. We need to have a revolution that's communist and continue the communist lifestyle. This made the Bolsheviks the odd one out. Everyone else cooperated in the honeymoon of revolution. However, as the popularity for the provisional government declined, the only alternative were the Bolsheviks. Lenin also played on the weaknesses of the provisional government, calling for peace, bread and land, and all power to the Soviets, something that really resonated with the people at this time, and it attracted a lot of support. With the April thesis, the Bolsheviks had a clear aim throughout, and it seemed to be working with the working classes. Supporters grew in number, and even people in the Soviets started supporting the Bolsheviks. Lenin was clever to set his party apart from the failing provisional government, to manipulate their weaknesses to his strengths, but also to arrange a Soviet takeover, not a Bolshevik one. You also need to know what was Trotsky's role. He turns Bolshevik in July 1917, he becomes chairman of the Soviet in September 1917, and he's the one who suggests it's time to strike before the meeting of the All-Soviets. He's the one who organises and carries out the October Revolution using the MRC. He also assists in the closure of the Constituent Assembly and reorganises the Red Army as an effective force. He also is responsible for negotiating in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and becomes a figurehead in the Civil War. He also saves Petrograd during the Civil War and approves the ban on factions. Finally, you need to know the impact of certain events. So firstly, the June offensive. The provisional government decided to launch an offensive on Germany. Kerensky organises it, and he hopes that it would allow Russia to bargain from a position of strength, but actually it's a disaster, and everything goes wrong, they all desert, it's just chaos again. So it's a big disaster. Next you have the July days. The Bolsheviks get the blame for the uprising. They're discredited by it. Lenin flees to Finland, and he does this famous quote where he says, "Revolution will not happen in our lifetime." It really shows that the provisional government is still able to defend itself and resist insurrection. Next is the Kornilov affair, which is very confusing, but we're looking at the impact. So basically the provisional government is revealed as weak and unable to defend itself. Kerensky asks the Soviet for help against Kornilov's troops, and members of the Soviet are now Bolshevik supporters. So essentially the Bolsheviks are now armed and let out of prison to help Kerensky, which seems odd to us, but is what happens. Their reputation grows as defenders of Petrograd, and the Bolsheviks are sort of back in business after the July days. And then lastly is the Bolshevik seizure of power itself. So Trotsky suggests a takeover before the meeting of the All-Soviets, and Lenin has to take over before the elections in November. Using his influence as the Soviet chairman, Trotsky uses the MRC to cut off the city and enter the Winter Palace to arrest the provisional government.